Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's talk, sponsored by the Center for Korea Research at the Weatherhead East Asian Institute. My name is Chungwon Kim, and I'm a historian of early modern Korea, teaching here at Columbia University. So it's truly my pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Michael Pettid, a distinguished scholar in uh, the field of Korean literature, pre-modern Korean literature, history, and culture. Professor Pettid is currently professor of Korean studies at Binghamton University, and he is the author, editor, and translator of numerous important works, including 운영전, The Love Affair at the Royal Palace of Choson, Korea, which was published by the University of California Press, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And also Living and Confucianism in Choson, Korea, New Perspectives by SUNY Press, and Death, Mourning, and the Afterlife in Korea by University of Hawaii Press, and Pre-Modern Korean Literary Prose by Columbia University Press, and most recently, the Encyclopedia of Daily Life by the University of Hawaii Press. He also serves as a co-editor of the Cambridge History of Korea. Many of his works are the ones I always assign in my own classes, and they continue to inspire students to think deeply about the literature and daily life, books, and for culture and religion, and most importantly, the lived experiences of the Choson, people in Choson, Korea. So today, Professor Pettid will focus on that very important book, The Encyclopedia of Daily Life, a remarkable 19th century guide written by Lady E, which offers vivid insights into women's knowledge and domestic life in late Joseon Korea. So please join me warmly welcoming Professor Peck.
Remember to talk into the microphone here. Thank you very much, Professor Kim. That was very kind of you. I don't think I'm worthy of all that. But anyway, I'm glad you all could come here today, and I hope I can come up with something interesting. So this work that Professor Kim talked about, the Choson, was, I suppose, early. Oh, I can't even remember. Between 1809 and 1824 is when Lady E kind of put it together. But it was added to later on by other people, which kind of makes it really interesting for me that it's kind of a work that continued to live after her death in 1824. And it has really a lot of interesting stuff in it, I think. We only translated about half of it. So there's a whole nother half out there for someone that's ambitious. It's a lot of work. But today I want to kind of look at a little bit different aspect of it. And I wanted to kind of examine material life for upper status people in the late Choson period. So, like what I'm really interested in is how people lived, what they did it with, what they ate, what they wore, and that kind of thing. And so this is kind of in there, mostly dealing with the kitchen and then with medicines. And so that's kind of what I'm going to focus on today. So if you have any questions, stop me. Otherwise, I'll just go on and on here, okay? So for me, one of the most intriguing challenges of historical studies is to capture how people truly lived at a particular point in time. Beyond the names, places, and dates, beyond consequential actions of great leaders and wicked villains, lie the more elusive questions. What was life really like? How did people dress? How did people eat? How did they care for themselves? What objects filled their homes? And what daily rituals defined their existence? Answers to such questions are not easily found in official histories, as you can imagine. They tend towards the institutional or political aspects of society. But what we're looking for is the mundane, the nuances of life, what people did with waking, with working, with cooking, and with caring for others. And this made up most of their life, just like it makes up most of our lives, I think. So these small everyday moments, though not very important, are actually really important if we want to understand what people did and how they lived. And here we have one woman amongst about 17 million inhabitants at the time she wrote this, and this is kind of her take on life, which is interesting for me. So I think I'm going to talk about Lady E here a bit. Can I do that? No, I cannot. Okay. I'm not very good at this. I don't know what I should be pointing it at. Yeah, I tried the arrow, it didn't. Maybe if I go down. No. Which, oh. Ah, there we go. So okay, got it. I'm just like this at my own school. I can't run anything. It's pretty pathetic when students have to help me out with stuff. Okay, so I want to talk about Lady E, who lived from 1759 to 1824, and her household. Through her writings, we kind of glimpse a world shaped by her resourcefulness and her autonomy within the constraints of her time. And I think that's important. When we think about autonomy in the Choson period for women, it is within the Choson period, right? She wasn't particularly famous in her own era, and nor was her family particularly prosperous. So she was kind of one of the members of the fallen Yangban bit that was prominent by the 19th century. I mean, her extended family was kind of famous, but that's different. But her guidebook, it's an encyclopedia of domestic practice that she compiled for her daughters and her daughter-in-laws, offers a really detailed view of how a household might have functioned from its cuisine to caregiving practices. Although members of her extended family still enjoy fame as authors of important books in the intellectual sphere, Lady E wrote with the authority of lived experience, managing her household with a hands-on approach that reflected her personal interpretation of morality and practicality. Her writings bridge the gap from historical abstraction and tangible reality, revealing a vibrant tapestry of tools, techniques, and traditions that sustained her family and, by extension, illuminate the lives of countless of others like her. So her pen name, hopefully we have this. There we go. No, I don't have it, of course. Why would I have it? Her pen name is Pinglohak, which means stand alone, to stand by yourself. And she's picked this out according to her, what we've read about her when she was 11 years old. So she had already decided she was going to be this independent woman when she was 11 years old, which is kind of interesting. She was born in Hanyang, which was the capital of Choson, Korea, and today's Seoul. In 1759, and she died in 1824. Her family was famous at times. They were of Yangban status, and I have a couple of things in here that are important. She was the paternal aunt of Yu Pei, who compiled things such as the Mulbyanggo and the Onmunchi. They don't seem very good, do they? And her husband was the elder brother of So Yu-go, who's quite famous for the Imwan Simnyukchi, which is a book on agrarian practices in the late Choson period. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But they weren't particularly well off. And matter of fact, they were forced to move from the capital to the countryside in order to get by. So they're not wealthy. And I think this really helps in the way that this book that she wrote comes out, because we have a book that's being compiled by someone, can't even turn pages, by someone that's actually doing all these things she's writing about. She's not necessarily managing her servants or the household slaves, but she's actually doing stuff here. Perhaps this is the best thing about it, I think. So we see when she writes the introduction to the book, she talks about passing on information that's going to be of use to her daughters and help them live their lives in a better way. I think that's really important, that she really was looking to make things simpler for her daughters. Just four, maybe. Yeah, here we go. So there are 5 volumes in all. Volumes on food and drink, needlework and weaving, managing a rural household, disease and medicine, suppressing evil spirits, and maintaining a spiritually clean household. I'd really like to go back and do the last volume, the fifth one about the evil spirits, but I think I'll be retired before I get it done, so probably not, but someone else can do it. So anyway, our translation looks at food and drink and medicine, which is about half the work. What else we got here? What stands out in this work is maybe her autonomy and how she took this to heart in managing her household. It's actually quite surprising sometimes, some of the stuff that she comes up with. She wasn't a woman who merely followed Confucian norms, but she was a decisive actor who shaped her own life and her domestic sphere on her own terms. Again and again, she asserts her own moral reasoning. Sometimes she's compassionate, sometimes she's rather ruthless as the final authority. She criticizes widely practiced She criticizes widely practiced methods for trying to ensure a male child, for example, warning that such techniques can endanger both the mother and the fetus. There were many practices to turn the sex of a baby, for example, that were practiced in Choson Dynasty. So if you thought you were going to have a girl, you'd do something to do that. But some of them are kind of weird, like going up to mountains in the middle of the night and weird stuff like that that pregnant women probably shouldn't be doing. But anyway, she says that these are bad, and if somebody was to do these and hurt the fetus, then they'd be guilty for 100 cycles under karmic law, which I think is really good. Likewise, she condemns a popular recipe for steamed piglet, acknowledging that the dish may be immeasurably beautiful to taste, but insisting that to kill a sow and her unborn litter is not virtuous and should be avoided. Let's see that, yeah. Yet her moral compass is anything but timid. Some of her more audacious remedies are reserved for dealing with excessive drinkers. She advises secretly doctoring their liquor with ingredients like cinnabar, which is mercury sulfide and poisonous, and hawk dung, so that the drinker will never drink of his or her own will again. In one recipe, she calls for 18.75 grams of cinnabar to be mixed into 12.6 liters of liquor. Sounds like a lot, huh? But enough that even a single cup might cause nausea, dizziness, or gas problems with your stomach, right? All sorts of things going on. The final step, seal the bottle and leave it in a pig pen for 7 days so the animals can move it around and jostle it a bit. The irony is kind of sharp. She forbids killing pregnant pigs to get their piglets, but she's got no problems enlisting the pigs to ferment her doctored liquor that she's going to serve to whoever she wants to stop drinking. She saw no contradiction in these stances, and it indicates an independent ethical framework to combat spiritual and physical harm on the practical level. The most important book of the day, the Tongi Pogam, the Exemplar of Eastern Medicine, that was compiled beginning in 1596, quite simply states, if one drinks liquor for a long time, it will damage one's mental capacity and be an obstacle to a long life. Lady E took this information to heart and put it into practice. So her guidebook's not merely a record of inherited traditions and book learning, but a declaration of moral agency. And for Lady E, managing a household meant managing the body's behaviors and consequences within it. And that you could do this with decisiveness, wit, and a bit of agency too while you're at it. There we go. So the moral agency kind of permeates the entire guidebook. She doesn't necessarily defer to male-authored codes or limit herself to conventional gendered roles. She consistently asserts her own judgment, and she states what she believes is right to be the right action in a given circumstance, and just as importantly, she rejects things that she doesn't see as right. Her convictions are not necessarily rooted in Confucian ideals or her role as a woman, but emerge as a part of her personal ethic shaped by lived experience. And just to break from my thing here, I think that's one of the most important things that I got out of this book while translating it was the fact that her life was a mixture of everything. It's folk practices, it's Buddhism, it's Confucianism, it's everything in there. And I think for people in this time period, that's how they lived, that's how they understood the world, quite simply. See. So anyway, this is a valuable record, I think, of how a principled woman might have actually lived in the late Choson. A record of an actual woman negotiating her life amidst a sea of rules and social norms that were far more malleable than many modern histories would have us believe. Perhaps the best way to understand this is to think of the diversity in the term woman, of what the term woman means today, and apply it to pre-modern Korea as well. So let's begin with this and a trip to the marketplace. You guys know what these things are? I don't either. I have to look here. I think the one on the top is white Pachma Polyan. I don't even know what that is. And the other one is Elisma, I believe. I should have put a text in there. Okay. When providing one of her several cures to prevent drunkenness, Lady E tells us to gather the following ingredients, and they're listed up here. And this is called the Taoist Hermit's Elixir to Prevent Drunkenness. That's what she called this. That's what it's called in her book. And so there's quite a bit of things that she's getting here. I mean, if you look at the list, it seems like maybe this isn't all stuff I can find in my backyard, regardless of how big my backyard is. Some of this stuff you could roam the woods and pick up. And I think women and some men folk in the late Choson had a really sharp knowledge of what herbs and whatnot could be harvested and used for medicines, for eating and stuff. And that was still true 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when I first went to Korea to see people that were able to go out and find things in the woods so easily. But that kind of knowledge doesn't everybody have it, I think. And as we get closer, as we move further along the line, less and less people have it, I think. So it's kind of disappearing, I think. So where would she get these things? I mean, we have folk songs in the Choson period that taught little girls how to pick greens, for example, which ones to pick. So with that kind of thing is there, but how much time is she going to pick wandering around the mountains to get all these goodies? Probably not. She's going to do like we do. She's going to go to the marketplace and buy this stuff, right? She's going to go to the wherever is out there, her market, and pick up these things. So markets are interesting in the late Choson. Well, actually, even in the early Choson, but by the late Choson, they developed quite a bit. We had the 6 licensed stores that sold these, that basically had monopolies on these certain items that were taxed. They paid a tax to the government for the right to sell them. But this would come and go, and there were other people that sold them. So it was kind of a loose type monopoly, I would say. What's important for us here is these 5-day markets, the Oilchang. And by the 19th century, in her lifetime, the Oilchang, the 5-day markets, had spread throughout the peninsula, and there were about 1,000 of them, what we can say. Now, these markets were held every 5 days because that gave the peddlers a chance to go from marketplace to marketplace to marketplace to marketplace, and then back home. So they had a chance to restock. Other peddlers would show up when they had crops to sell. And so they had time to go back home and get these things. And so they were kind of kind of the local connection to the rest of the country. I suppose that would be a good way to say it, because things that were bought at the big markets were brought to these smaller markets, and then they were sold again. And so we have a lot of that spread there. Since Lady E lived in a rural area, that's probably where she shopped. There's really an awareness of the broader commercial landscape evident in her writings as well. And towards the end of the book, there's a lengthy list of the famous goods of the 8 provinces, which is interesting, I think. Not that it shows us what people valued highly, what was the most important things, what they recognized. Even today in Korea, we look at different areas, cities, and we say, Jeonju is famous for bibimbap or something like that, right? I mean, this is a thing today, but in the 19th century, 18th century, this would have even been more widespread, I think. And so she has kind of like this listing that goes on for pages and pages, but it's kind of like things that she valued, she wanted, she heard of, not necessarily had though. And she goes on and on. I mean, it's just quite a list. I'll save you from me going through it, but it even goes down to stuff like where you get the best dishes inlaid with mother pearl, which is Tongyang. Namwon is famous for paper, brassware from Tongnae, broad brim hats, of course, from Jeju, right? And so on and so forth. But so it's interesting to see what she didn't necessarily have, but she valued and other people did, I think. So these 5-day markets were essential to the people, as they generally represented the only spot in a rural area where one could obtain goods that were not locally produced. And if you think about that, we live in New York State. If we didn't have markets, what would we eat? Apples and kale, I think. I don't know, what else do we grow upstate? I mean, that's about it. So but we have access to markets. Well, it's the same in the Choson dynasty. Granted, Korea is a lot smaller than this country, but it was split up by mountains. It was difficult to travel. It was dangerous to travel. So if you wanted something, it had to come to you, not the other way around. And most people didn't have the freedom to travel as we do. Yeah, I think that's enough on that. Let's talk about the kitchen, because that's where it all starts, right? Kitchen. It's funny, my daughter she's texting. My daughter's in college now. So she texted me last night and she says, I really miss Korean food. I'm like, me too. Yeah. Okay. So her kitchen. Lady Yi's kitchen must have been incredibly well stocked with a variety of cookware and utensils to make the foods she describes in her book. Aside from the heavy cast iron kama salt, that's the black thing on the earth there. She had those are used for cooking rice and soups, right? She evidently had a large array of stone, iron, brass, and bamboo pots and pans to cook various items in. Her recipes are quite specific as to what items should be cooked in what. And we can understand that an upper status kitchen of her time, even a poor upper status kitchen of her time, would have been equipped with dozens of bowls, pots, and pans, and the like. So we see these specific instructions. For example, she tells her readers that for making rice and porridge, stone pots are the best, and earthenware crocks are the second best. So there's a reason to all this, right? Earthenware crocks. Okay, here we go. Earthenware crocks, they're here too, right? Over there in the corner on the, what is it, the left. You guys know what these are, right? Yeah. You don't? Do? You know what they are? They're these big pots that they keep. Oh, I think I'd take this with me. Because we're zooming, yeah. They're these big pots over here that were used to store things. These ones here, maybe grain. Maybe this is grain, maybe water, but you needed to have these things in your kitchen. They were also used for fermenting kimchi and fermenting condiments like soy sauce and doenjang or soybean paste and things like that, right? So you had to have these things. So they were really important there to have. So she had all these. And these date quite a ways back. I think the sizes of these crocks can range from quite small, maybe you'd keep salt in a smaller one, to quite large that could hold the winter's kimchi, for example, hundreds of heads of cabbage or something in a couple of these pots. And she has recipes that call for liquor that takes hundreds of liters of water. So these are big. So they're different sizes, but they're used for a lot of different things, and they would be outside the home. Yeah, here we go. On a terrace on the right. So that's where you would store them outside the kitchen. And that would be your condiments, kimchi, things like that would be in these pots out there, right? So the use of these crocks, and they're known as ongi, dates to prehistory in Korea. And these have been used for a long time to store foods and grains. There are various sizes with different names used for different items that would be stored in them. Hangari, which are also known as changdo, were used to store condiments. Mulhang were large crocks that were used to keep water in. And sulhang for liquor, and tonghang for human waste, which was collected and spread out in the fields. So we'd have these. A 16th century writer informs that these are the most important storage vessels for the people. They're carried out of places such as Mapo and Norangjin, where they're made of fired clay and known as hangari, a type of storage vessel. And so these crocks would have been sold by itinerant merchants at either a marketplace or impromptu spots where there'd be enough foot traffic to generate sales. At a modest upper status home like Lady Yi's, there would have been dozens of these crocks around the house. Do you have a question? No, nobody? Okay. You look perplexed. All right. The preparation of liquor. Preparation of liquor is really one of the most important things that upper status women did. Liquor was not just for drinking at home, it was for entertaining guests. So if somebody came to your house, you would offer them liquor. It would be rude to do otherwise, I suppose. And so this was a big part of her life. Within this book, there are 23 types of drinks that carry different things. And some of them look pretty interesting. I've never tried to make any of them, but some of them look fairly interesting, like this Han Mountain Spring, that has the glutinous rice, sticky rice with malt, pine nuts, jujube, black pepper, and soju. And you'd put it all in there and make let it sit until it ferments for some period of time, and you'd be all set, right? I'm sure it's not that easy. But anyway, these were used as a way to extend hospitality to people. They were a marker of a home. An upper status home had to do this. And interesting, if we look at diaries and stuff that date into the Choson dynasty, the one I'm thinking of off the top of my head is the Pyeongja Ilgi, which was written in the early 17th century during the Manchu invasions. And she always talks about so-and-so, such and such minister came and he had 4 cups of liquor, or he had 3 cups of liquor, something like. So we're seeing that this is kind of a expected function of the household, and And of course, that would fall on the woman to do this. I think it would be a way to boost her husband's esteem, I suppose, by having good liquor, but also her own control of the house, I think, is kind of interesting the way that works. But brewing liquor, if y'all have done it, isn't that easy. You needed special pots and stuff for this. And of course, for brewing liquor, one of the most important things is everything's sterile. You can't have germs in there, it'll ruin it, right? You know, it can't be bacteria, so it has to be cleaned out with boiling water and stuff like that. That's what they had. But there were a lot of things needed for it. You needed sieves for straining the liquor. You needed various measuring cups and bowls, silk and hemp straining bags for adding flavor. They could be taken out easily. And if you were making soju, you needed this. This is a soju kori. And this snowman looking thing here, right? And it has like a little snout here that comes down, and that's where the liquor would come out. So you heat this up, the liquor boils, it forms a gas, and then it drips out. And so it's a lot stronger than the liquor that you started with, right? So this is something they devised at some point, probably in Koryo, when this comes into the country, but to make liquor. But every house would have had one of these in order to do that. And the distilled liquor versus fermented liquor is the difference in cooking it, right? And turning it into that gaseous state where you have the stronger alcohol as a result. So this would be something that they needed to do this. They could be made of anything, I suppose, but the ones I've always seen have been made out of earthenware. It seems like the easiest, as long as the lid goes on there. And Lady used rice flour to seal it, right? Kind of a doughish rice flour that would seal the lid and keep it from coming off, and the liquor would come out that way. Pretty ingenious. So aside from all this equipment needed, there's a vast array of ingredients that she needed for making the liquors that her household favored. And so the basic ingredients for all liquor would begin with rice, either glutinous or regular rice, and malt. That's what you start with. And then everything else you're adding in there to add flavors and whatnot. And of course, these could be purchased at the marketplace. We have seasonal ingredients probably obtained around the house, such as azalea or peach blossom. She could probably get those, I imagine. But other stuff like black pepper, cinnamon, jujubes probably would have been found at the market. Other ingredients such as pine tree joints and probably could have obtained in her backyard, but I don't think Lady E was climbing up pine trees and cutting off branches and stuff. I just don't see that in my mind, but maybe, you never know. So if the marketplace provided a convenient spot to obtain ingredients for making liquor and remedies against too much of it, markets were even more important for the preparation of foodstuffs. You got to have food, right? Lady E would have needed to buy most of her marine goods and meats, such as beef and pork, at the market, where animals and also things like, I suppose, animals such as dogs and chickens could be raised at the house. She does talk about how to kill animals, particularly dogs, but I don't think she actually is doing it. There's a difference here. I think she's outlaying what to do in killing the animal, but not necessarily doing it herself. I just don't picture upper status chickens. Okay, dogs, no, it's different. I think that's just my feeling, but she does tell how to do it, which is interesting, I suppose. Marine goods, I don't think that she would have fished. Just doesn't seem to work with my image of what's going on here, right? That just doesn't work. Yeah. So anyway, cattle raising, and if you raise cattle, then how do you slaughter them? Who slaughters these animals in the Choson period? It generally is not the producer, it goes to the butcher, because there's pollution associated with slaughtering of animals, right? And so that's not something that I think she would have been interested in obtaining. That's what we had butchers for. And so that's where I think most of this is taking place. Not necessarily, though. I suppose it could be elsewhere. And then we have some kimchi recipes that call for adding fish such as croaker, yellow corvina, Korean herring, another kind of herring. So she's getting these fish again from the marketplace. She also talks about buying a beef broth for a certain kimchi recipe that she had to buy the day before. And she says, go to the market and go to a store called a tarimbang. And a tarimbang sold beef broth. That's what they did. So she would go there to get good beef broth. I wonder what the shelf life of beef broth is. How long can you keep that without refrigerating it? I have no idea, but I imagine it's kind of limited. Yeah, because once air hits that, it's going to start changing the composition of it. There were also fish shops that sold kind of a random slide there. There are also fish shops that sold live marine products such as cod or crabs. Some specialized in salted or dried fish. If you're at all familiar with fish in Korea, you know there's a whole array of ways of fixing it, preparing it, preserving it. And it's very, again, locally oriented. You know, certain things are at different places. But there were shops that would have sold this meat, such as birds such as pheasant or quail or sparrow, I think would have been sold by hunters who would have killed these birds, captured these birds, and then sold them. And chickens, I don't know, but I think she might have raised chickens in her house. I think that's possible. She does talk about eggs and whatnot. And slaughtering a chicken is a little bit different than slaughtering a dog or a cow. It's a lot easier. I grew up on a ranch. I know about these things. So it's a lot easier, you know, it's not the same sort of thing. So I could see that being something that was done internally, but a lot of the stuff I just don't see happening at the house. And reading her book, there's certainly, we see a lot of the commentary on Buddhist beliefs about killing, about treating things right, and folk beliefs within Korean shamanism, whatever you want to call it, that also looked at this pollution associated with death. Yes, please. Yeah, milk wasn't really a thing. For milk, it's just a matter of milking the cow. If you have a milk cow, it's not hard, I guess. We didn't have milk cows, but it's fairly straightforward. But I don't. I think they used it in some of they called it meal, which is kind of a really thin chuk or something at the royal palace, and they had it occasionally. But I don't think it was part of the diet. Eating dairy products was really something that didn't come to Korea until the latter half of the 20th century, I think, with the US involvement over there, maybe earlier. So yeah, I mean, she doesn't talk about milk at all. Good. Yeah. Okay. And the other thing that we have here is our confections. This was another area that women could show their mastery of the domestic realm by making these. I mean, these were normally eaten only on special occasions, right? The peksolgi on the top was for a baby's first birthday, for example. So that's really first birthday, 100th day, something like that, one or the other, or both. But these are a lot of symbolic value, and they took a lot of time to make. So it's not so much for the calories you're getting out of it, but it's the significance of the dish itself. And the thing to remember, of course, is these dishes were generally shared with your neighbors, not necessarily eaten within the household. So there was this pushing it out in there. But the ingredients to go into these are pretty amazing. You know that you need mushrooms in some of them, lotus fruit, honey, lotus root, yuza, wallets, pine nuts, jujubes, and all this sort of thing that goes into these. So these aren't easy to make. Pine dust pollen, right? The pine trees have a pollen in the spring, and that dust is a yellow color that goes on the dog, right? I think I've had that on it with a insular bean. I'm not really sure. Can't remember. I can't remember. Seems like I should have. Yeah, it's good stuff. There are other confections that are made from oil flour and fried. These are the yumukwa. And these were, again, all sorts of different ingredients that went into these: cinnamon, uh, what else do I have here? Honey, Gromwell, sesame seeds, and salt. So you would need flour and oil. All these things had to be bought at the marketplace. I guess that's what I'm kind of get here. And finally, we have the jellied fruits of pyeon. And the pyeon would be hawthorn, cherries, raspberries. So they're the jellied fruit that's boiled, and it's tasty. What happens? But she spends a lot of time talking about confections and alcohol in her food section. And so that kind of shows us what's important there, right? That this is a very important part of her life, and something that she must have excelled at, I guess. What else we got here? Oh, and the things you need to make them is pretty complicated too. I don't know if you guys have ever been involved with making rice cake. Yeah, you got to have something to beat it down. And then you have to have the molds, right? That you force it into, and then it puts a shape or puts a character on it, like a Sue for longevity or Polk for happiness, something like that. So these are all things that she would have had to buy, and they would have been a part of her kitchen that she would have had to take care of and stuff. So it's we can see there are a lot of stuff going on here. The next section I'd like to talk about is the apothecaries. Yes, please.
Signs of financial consideration, for example, for the ones that call for a lot of experience, she giving like for training that might teach.
She doesn't, to my knowledge, but she just gives the recipe. And so I don't know if she's manipulating the recipe by what's available to her or what she can access, or because I really can't cook Korean food. And so I really don't know how to do it. So I'm not sure if there's another way to do it or not. But I suspect that she's not giving recipes for things that can't be gotten hold of easily. And this is for her daughters, her daughter-in-laws. So I assume that this was something that was connected to what was available. So if it was something exotic that she couldn't get, maybe she would just drop that out of the recipe. Quite possibly. It's hard to say. If I could cook, it'd be better. No such luck. All right. So the apothecaries. This is kind of interesting that these become so widespread by the second half of the 18th century, and they're everywhere. And you guys aren't old enough, but before in Korea, this is 35, 40 years ago, if you were sick, you went to the pharmacy and you asked the yaksa, what do I, and he'd give you medicine. Well, doctors in Korea didn't like that. So it's been the subject of much debate. And nowadays, it's kind of like getting like here where you have to have a prescription more or less. But traditionally, if you were sick, you went to the druggist, and the druggist, well, of course they know what you need, right? That's what they do. They handle drugs. And so I think the spread of these is kind of interesting in the latter half of the dynasty. If you couldn't afford a physician, you could certainly afford to go to the drugstore, the apothecary, and get what you needed to get well. Anyway, she gives a pretty good recipe here to prevent miscarriages. And if we look at the things that are needed in it, tangui, chagyuk, pekchul, chongung, and other stuff. It's even hard to say. All these different ingredients that go into it. I mean, it'd be really difficult to know where to get these things and to get them right. So this is where we have the druggist, the person that would have already had these items collected, cut up, powdered, and easily weighed and given off to people. And so she has kind of this recipe that was to prevent miscarriages. And she talks about that if the woman that's pregnant is having problems, that you need to give them this stuff at once. At once, does that mean that she has it in the house? I don't know that, but I know that she could go to the drugstore and get it, just like we can go to, what do we got around here? CVS's or whatever, something like that. Yeah, same sort of thing. Medical knowledge itself became kind of, that's the Dongi Pogam, became kind of widespread by the latter half of the Choson for a number of factors, I think. The numerous books, I think, that were out there, and also the people's lives that improved. Coming to after the difficult 17th century and we get into the 18th century, there's a bit of a resurgence to Korea, to the culture, to the economy. Things are going better. There's less fussing and fighting amongst the political factions because we have a strong king that's keeping that down. And the lives of the people are better. If you want to live longer, right, you're going to have to take medicines and stuff. This becomes important, I think. Families, upper status families would invariably have copies of this Dongi Pogam in their house. And it gives, the advice is fairly straightforward. It's easy to read. Not necessarily that you should practice what you read in there, because some of it's a little bit bizarre, but nonetheless, it's easy to digest, I suppose. Yeah. So anyway, this becomes widespread, and it's a part of life, I suppose. And she does borrow heavily from the Dongi Pogam in compiling her own work. The nice thing about her work is that she actually tells where she gets information, for the most part, which for pre-modern society, we didn't really have a concept of plagiarism like we have nowadays, right? But she would actually put in a little footnote and say where she got something from. And other times she wouldn't, and that would be information that she came up with on her own, or she heard from somebody or something. But it gives us a little bit of a trail, I think. And so we can look at her recipes or her cures for medicine, and then, you know, check the Tony Bolam to see if it's the same thing or whatever. I mean, if one was ambitious, they could do that. But the few times I've checked, it's been spot on. She knows what she's doing there. So yeah. Anyway, the profession of the druggist was quite commonplace, and going to buy drugs, herbs, was another big thing. So people traveled around the country to get these things. And then they would take them to the markets and sell them, and they'd get spread out all over the country. Pretty cool thing. Another factor, I think, is that the overall intellectual movement in the late Choson in the 18th and 19th century was a little bit more focused on practicality of life. The Confucian debates about the supremacy of E and Gi were kind of in our rearview mirror, fortunately. And now we're talking about things that actually matter to people, which is interesting here. So her paternal aunt wrote the Shinteikyo, which is a book on prenatal care. And so this knowledge was out there, and her family in particular was into that sort of thing. So it's interesting, I think. Yeah. All right. And then there's this idea that is kind of Confucian, that your body is, of course, bequeathed to you by your parents, and it's your duty to take care of your body. Right? You don't want to be an unfilial child. You've got to be healthy. And so the focus on health and stuff was pretty important, I think. So we talked about that. We don't talk about that again. So in her work, we find a lot of what I would call, I suppose, first aid, mostly what she does. I mean, she does talk a lot about prenatal care and stuff like that, but the other things that people needed to know how to take care of was first aid. You know, what happens when you cut your finger with a knife? What are you supposed to do? What if you get bit by some nasty looking spider or a horse? She has horse bites were pretty common, I think, in Choson. Choson ponies were nasty, I think. They weren't very well behaved. I mean, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence about these horses biting people all the time. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing she has in her book, a lot of this stuff. So it's practical stuff. We also see how to get rid of bugs, which I think is interesting. So she talks about the kind of bugs that we like, right? Lice, cockroaches, mosquitoes. How do you get those out? Rats. How do you get those out of your house? And this is a focus of her book, right? This was clearly a problem for people. They didn't have screens on their windows yet, you know. And you're going to have mosquitoes. You're going to have flies and stuff in there. So a goodly portion of her book is dedicated to prenatal care, childbirth, and caring for infants. Given the importance of children, I have in parentheses male children, but you know, I don't know about that. So all children are important. It doesn't matter what their gender was to the mother and the father, right? I mean, eventually a male's going to have a different role than a female child did. But when the kid's young, it's your baby and you want to take care of it. So I leave that out. Ensuring that the infants lived for the first few of their lives was really paramount and really difficult. You know, there's a custom in Korea of not giving a baby a name till they're 100 days old. That's because the vast majority of babies didn't make it to 100 days old. And so why waste a good name? Children under 10 were generally not included in the census. So again, they hadn't reached adulthood. There was no certainty that they would. I have no idea what the infant mortality rate would have been in the Choson dynasty. But that said, if we look at the biographies of upper status women that were written by their sons or their husbands after their death, you'll invariably see that they've had 10 or more pregnancies and maybe only had 4 or 5 children, if that actually made it up to adulthood. So I don't know what it would come to. And I would think a Yangban status family would be better equipped to take care of children and problems that came up than would a commoner household. I don't know that for an exact truth, but it seems to me that would be a part of it as well. So So it's a good question. If you guys ever need something to study and want to write something really good, that would be it. Infant mortality in the Choson dynasty. I would buy your book, definitely. Yeah, so the 100-day rule is that you don't let anyone in the delivery room where the baby's born for that 100-day period, right? Then it's awarded the name at that time. And this, today I think 21 days is the modern number that I hear, but it makes sense. You don't want people around your baby breathing on it, giving it germs before it's old enough to at least have its immune system start kicking in the gear or something. Yeah. So, I mean, it might be an old thing, but it still works, right? Am I off here? Oh, no, I'm not. Okay. Um, so aside from caring for newborns, well, actually, I'm not done with that. Other instructions she gives us to avoid an infection when cutting the umbilical cord. And there was a lot of stuff associated with the umbilical cord, how you buried it, which direction it's facing, and all these things is to predict, divine, foretell the future for the child. But infection's kind of a real thing, right? That you cut something and it's not clean, it's going to cause an infection, right? And so she talks about covering the navel of the child with clean cotton and washing it every 3 days with spring water boiled in a silverware bowl with a bit of gold, silver, jade, pearl, and a piece of tiger skull. She got that stuff at the market, right? I'm assuming the tiger skull came from the market. But I mean, she has these ideas of taking care of the child in the best way. And I think with child care, prenatal care, and after it's born, it's where we can really see that mix of folk culture with science, where they're all coming together. The science of course, of East Asian cosmology based on that. But it all comes together with babies because there were ideas that there were spirits that would kill newborns. Tesai, it was a thing, and they had certain days of the 60-day calendar where you weren't supposed to do certain things to that baby for that reason, because you didn't want that problem to arise. Yeah, other afflictions. She says you can take care of a roundworm infestation by adding 11.25 grams of chinaberry tree root to another medicine. It seems to be a medicine that could be purchased. It's called Anhe. I think they still sell it. But anyway, she had different things going in here. What I found really interesting is this last one here where she talks about this medicine. This is when we really go from science to, I don't know, folklore. And so this is the firefly light medicine of the fairy. There we go. I don't know. That's a good translation. I'm not sure. I had someone ask me about Shinson just the other day. One of my colleagues, how do you translate Shinson? And I fairy. For me, it's a fairy, but I think that conjures up like Tinkerbell or something. No, I mean it doesn't have the same thing. I mean, what would you translate that? Has anybody got a better than fairy? It's not that easy, is it? Yeah, I think fairy's right. I don't. Well, I mean, does that, yeah, fairy? Let's go with fairy. Okay, anyway, this medicine's supposed to take care of all sorts of disease and make the individual invulnerable to attacks from ghosts, tigers, poisonous snakes, and thieves. It's really good stuff to take, I think. But the concoction, as you see, I mean, we have firefly, abdomens, winged burning bush, and bindi, regular and orpiment, or piment, and saiga antelope horn. These don't live in Korea. I don't think they've ever lived in Korea. They're Central Asia, and they're endangered evidently because they're put into medicine. That's the only thing I can think of. So they're evidently, it's kind of an ugly animal though, isn't it? But anyway, I guess they would probably think we're not very attractive either. Anyway, so she has this kind of recipe to prevent all these things that could happen to you. I think it's just kind of interesting that people still have the same sort of things. I mean, these elixirs that supposedly will protect you from things, a talisman, for example, that keeps you from getting in car accidents, something like that. We still have this in our society. We just don't. It's not as prominently presented, I think. But I mean, why not? I wouldn't mind being invincible. All right, let's see what we got here. I guess I'm kind of like finishing up. Not too quick. Oh, I could go longer. I could go on and on. Okay, so I got some conclusions here. So Lady E's guidebook stands as more than a compilation of one woman's advice for her family. It's a testament to the profound changes sweeping through late Choson Korea. By the late 18th and into the 19th century, this formerly agrarian society was increasingly driven by commerce, with markets and monetary exchanges deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. I mean, it's not capitalism, but economy, money becomes really important at this time. And it makes good sense, you know. Um, the economic shift had tangible consequences for households like Lady E's, where resourcefulness was essential to navigate rising prices and the fluctuating availability of goods. I read something a couple weeks ago, I don't know why. I was reading something about the fact that rice prices were sky high in the 19th century in Choson. And why did the price of rice go up? You know, I mean, there was an expanded population and whatnot, but I guess I don't necessarily think of pre-modern society functioning on the same sort of things that we function on, you know, like the price of eggs going up. I mean, that's something that seems to me that's for us in the 20th or 21st century in your cases. I mean, but no, it was a thing in Choson too. Rice goes up. What do you do? What do you do if rice goes up? You eat millet or you eat sorghum, you eat something different, right? I mean, you can't afford rice. There's other barley, right? There's other grains you can eat. Anyway, markets were all over the place. Like I said, about around 1,000 of the 5-day markets, and they became critical hubs where household could secure necessities ranging from kitchen basics to handicrafts and to niche ingredients for medicines and the like. The goods described in her guidebook vividly reflect this dynamic economic landscape, capturing both the increasing accessibility of the diverse products and the challenges of maintaining a household during this period with inflation and economic uncertainty. Unlike in the capital, where a small group of merchants monopolized licenses to sell key commodities, the 5-day markets of the rural areas kind of functioned on competition. And maybe they empowered consumers to haggle for better bargains. I don't know. I think I would try to get someone's price down on something, though. You know, that makes sense to me. But the guidebook's also equally remarkable for the insight into the autonomy and expertise of women in managing domestic spaces. Lady E's meticulous instructions for cooking, brewing, and medicine making reveal a blend of scientific knowledge, moral reasoning, and practical genius, I suppose. Her work underscores the critical role of women in shaping their family's material and spiritual well-being. In her writings, we see a balance between tradition and adaptation as she melded inherited knowledge with innovative practices tailored to her audience. As a marker of change, the encyclopedia of daily life, the Choson emphasis on goods demonstrates that Confucian values concerning trade and money had ebbed considerably by this point in time. You know, in the Analects, Confucius says that merchants are the the small person, because they operate out of getting benefit from you, taking advantage of you, right? And so this was kind of guided early Choson, the idea that merchants were evil in a sense. I mean, but I think we can kind of move beyond that a little bit here. Um, there was also an erosion of many of the restrictions traditionally upheld by aristocratic women at this time, with the expansion of the Yangban class and the number of Yangban women that were in households that were no longer holding government positions. Their latitude, I suppose, their compass, what they could do was greater because they were outside the official glare or whatever you'd want to call it there. Women were largely the primary decision makers in purchasing staple goods and managing household operations. Um, and unlike contemporary Korea, where men are often involved in domestic matters, men of this period were often, although not always, strangers to the kitchen. Not always so. They were there. So the authority and responsibility for planning all this pretty much fell on to the women folk of the household. Ultimately, the guidebook offers an invaluable lens through which we can explore the complexities of everyday life in a rapidly evolving world. It bridges the gap between grand narratives of history and the lived experiences of individuals, illustrating how the currents of societal change were felt in kitchens and sick rooms, storerooms, and marketplaces. Her words, Lady E's words, remind us that history is shaped not only by kings and scholars, but also by the skilled and resourceful hands that manage the rhythms of daily life. Thanks.